She thought she was just tired. She blamed it on work, on winter, on starting over alone. But when her dog started coughing, when he began pulling at her blanket in the middle of the night, she realized something wasn't right. What was poisoning her home couldn't be seen, smelled, or heard. And if it wasn't for him, her silent guardian, Lauren wouldn't be alive to tell you this story. Stay with us. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about the miracle that came on 4 legs, just in time. The sky over Portland, Oregon wore a tired gray shroud, the kind of early November gloom that settled deep into the bones. Rain had fallen earlier, just enough to paint the sidewalks and tree trunks a darker hue. And now the air hung still, damp, and faintly metallic. On Willoughby Street, tucked into a quiet row of modest red brick buildings, a U-Haul van idled before a second-floor walk-up, the kind of place people moved to when they were starting over. Lauren Mitchell, 32, paused at the base of the narrow stairs, a cardboard box cradled in her arms and a crease of hesitation between her brows. She was of medium height, her figure lean from years of walking to and from office jobs and refusing to learn to cook for one. Her dark brown hair, cut shoulder length and blunt, curled slightly from the humidity. Today, she wore a worn navy sweatshirt and black jeans, the kind of clothes you wear when no one's supposed to be looking. She had a face that could be striking if she allowed it. High cheekbones, quiet green eyes, a mouth that defaulted to serious. But her features bore the recent weight of loss of routine, of familiar arms, of the us she had fought to preserve longer than she should have. The breakup had been mutual only in theory. In reality, she'd packed first. David, her ex, hadn't argued. He'd just stepped aside, as if letting a leaf blow away. And now, here she was, new city, new apartment, same memories she hadn't shaken yet. The apartment itself was modest but functional. Warm hardwood floors stretched through a living room just big enough to hold the essentials. The windows were tall and invited the gray sky in without permission. The furniture came later. For now, the rooms echoed with the hollow thud of each box placed on the floor. As Lauren closed the door behind her, she noticed how loud the silence was. No humming refrigerator yet, no muffled footsteps from roommates or the familiar click of David typing. Just the steady tick of the radiator and the faint sound of traffic from Burnside Street in the distance. That night, after unpacking only enough to find clean sheets and a fork, Lauren curled on the futon mattress laid directly on the floor. She stared at the ceiling, arms folded across her stomach, listening to the hum of nothing. The apartment was hers. Entirely hers. But instead of the pride she had imagined, there was only a pang of uninvited loneliness. She wasn't scared to be alone, but she hadn't realized until now how much of herself had been defined in tandem with someone else. By the next morning, a decision had been made. A week later, Lauren found herself standing beneath a sagging awning that read, Heartline Animal Shelter. The building was small and practical, red paint chipped at the edges, but clean. Inside, the air smelled of pine cleaner and damp fur, not unpleasant, just honest. Looking for someone in particular? Asked the woman at the front desk, barely glancing up from her clipboard. Lauren smiled politely. Someone quiet, I think. Not too young. They led her past kennels where dogs of all sizes barked and danced behind chain-link gates. She paused, looked, moved on. And then she saw him. In the farthest corner of the row, sitting silently while the others clamored for attention, was a German shepherd, large, broad-shouldered, maybe 5 or 6 years old. His coat was a blend of deep saddle black and tawny gold, a little dusty but still striking. His ears were alert but relaxed, and his gaze locked onto hers with a stillness that made her breath catch. Not fearful, not eager, just present. Lauren crouched slowly. Hey, buddy, she whispered, fingers extending between the bars. He didn't move right away. Then, with measured steps, he approached, sniffed her hand, and rested his head against the metal in a calm, deliberate gesture. His eyes were the color of warm coffee, eyes that had seen things and endured them. That's Ranger, said the shelter volunteer. Picked him up 2 months ago. Found wandering near a rest stop on I-84. No collar, no microchip. Quiet type. Doesn't do well with high energy, but he's sharp, observant. Lauren nodded without looking away. I'll take him. 2 days later, Ranger arrived at the apartment. The moment he stepped through the door, he made a slow circuit around each room, pausing at corners, inspecting with the patience of a seasoned tenant. Then he sat beside the couch as if to say, "All right, this will do." Lauren laughed for the first time in weeks. That evening, as the rain began again in a slow, mournful drizzle, she poured herself tea and sat by the window. Ranger lay nearby, his breathing deep and even, his body still coiled with a kind of dignity even in rest. She hadn't realized how heavy her chest had felt until now, until there was another heartbeat in the apartment beside hers. She scratched behind his ears. "Looks like it's just us, huh?" Ranger blinked slowly, then exhaled. The next morning, as Lauren stepped outside to get the mail, she nearly collided with a tall man in a navy jumpsuit coming up the stairs. He was in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered with tousled blonde hair and hands that looked like they'd fixed 1,000 leaky pipes. His face was open, friendly but tired in the way that people who work with their hands often are. "Oh, hey, sorry," Lauren said, stepping back. "No worries," he smiled, lifting a wrench from his tool belt in greeting. "You just move in?" "Yeah, last week. I'm Elliot Thomas. Upstairs. If your sink starts sounding like it's possessed, that's me fixing mine." He chuckled lightly. There was something low-key about him, like someone who didn't talk unless he had something to say, but meant every word of it. Lauren grinned. "Lauren, nice to meet you." He nodded toward the apartment. "That your shepherd I saw in the window?" "Yeah, Ranger. Just adopted him. Good choice. Loyal dogs. Had one growing up. Saved my brother from walking into a frozen lake once. True story." His voice softened slightly with the memory. Lauren raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a story I want to hear sometime." Elliot chuckled again. Rain checked, then. As he disappeared up the stairs, Lauren felt the faintest trace of warmth in her chest. Maybe this new city wasn't so lonely after all. That night, she and Ranger settled on the futon once more. The room still smelled faintly of cardboard and old paint, but it was starting to feel like hers. Ranger rested with his head on his paws, eyes half closed but always aware. Lauren sipped tea and listened to the rhythm of rain against the windows. Outside, Portland breathed its damp autumn lullaby, and inside, for the first time since leaving everything behind, she didn't feel quite so alone. By the third evening, the November drizzle had evolved into a steady whispering rain that seemed to never end, a soft background rhythm that matched the quiet cadence of Lauren's new life. Portland had a way of wrapping you in its gray, less with sadness, more with stillness. In that stillness, patterns were beginning to take shape, and among them was a silent, slow-brewing ritual between Lauren and Ranger. She had bought him a dog bed on his first night home, plush, rectangular, and placed purposefully just to the left of her bedroom door. She'd picked it after 30 minutes of comparison shopping, wanting something orthopedic for his age and stature, though no one at the shelter had known exactly how old he was. Probably 5 or 6, maybe older. He had the look of a dog who had seen things and survived them. His coat, now brushed and shampooed, gleamed under the soft bedroom light, and the raw pads of his paws were already healing. He'd claimed his bed without protest that first night, curling into a silent loaf as Lauren drifted to sleep. But by the 5th night, she awoke to the slight pressure of warmth against her calves. Still fogged by sleep, she turned and blinked into the dark to find Ranger stretched along the foot of the bed, his breathing slow and steady. She frowned slightly. She could have sworn she'd seen him curled up on his bed when she turned off the lights. "Ranger," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. He lifted his head, ears slightly back as if bracing for reprimand. But then she sighed, too tired to insist. "Just this once," she added, settling deeper beneath the blanket. But once became twice, and twice became habit. By the end of the week, Ranger no longer waited until she was asleep. He leapt up with a silent, practiced grace just minutes after the lights dimmed, circling once before curling neatly into the same spot every time. Lauren should have said no, should have pushed him down, reminded him of boundaries. But the truth was, the weight of him was comforting. The way his presence steadied the air around her like a warm gravitational pull. After months of curling around emptiness, this quiet companionship, was healing in ways she hadn't expected. On Saturday morning, the first without rain in nearly 10 days, Lauren stepped out onto the stoop to retrieve her mail, Ranger sitting obediently at her heel. The air was sharp but golden with rare sunlight filtering through the trees. As she closed the mailbox, she spotted Elliot walking down the stairs with a small canvas tool bag in one hand and a leash in the other. At the other end of that leash was Boone, a chunky old Labrador with a silvering muzzle and a tail that wagged more out of courtesy than excitement. Boone gave a grunt when he saw Ranger, but didn't lunge or bark, just blinked slowly like an old man greeting another old man at a diner. Lauren smiled. I didn't know you had a dog. Elliot nodded. He's technically my sister's, but I've had him for the past year since she moved overseas. He's got arthritis, half blind in his left eye, and sleeps like a rock. But he's good company. Ranger and Boone sniffed each other cautiously, then settled into mutual indifference, as older dogs often do. No drama, just quiet respect. Want to join us for a walk? Elliot asked. She hesitated. I was about to make coffee. There's a place 3 blocks down. Walk there, walk back. Dogs get a stretch, we get caffeine. Lauren glanced at Ranger, who gave a soft woof and stared in the direction of the street, tail gently wagging. All right, she said, clipping on Ranger's leash. The 4 of them made their way down the block, boots clicking against wet pavement, the dogs walking in loose tandem. As they strolled, Lauren and Elliot exchanged snippets of daily life, small talk, favorite neighborhoods, complaints about Portland parking. She learned that Elliot had grown up in Spokane and moved to Portland 7 years ago after a divorce that he described with no bitterness, only a shrug and a quiet, "We were better apart." He asked her about Ranger, and she told him what little she knew. Found near a highway rest stop, no tags, no microchip. She confessed she'd picked him because he didn't bark, and that scared her less than the others who clamored for attention. Some dogs beg, Elliot said, and some just wait for the right person to notice them. Lauren glanced down at Ranger. Yeah, he just looked at me like he knew something I didn't. The cafe, Maple and Mirth, was a converted brownstone corner shop with dog bowls outside and warm cinnamon in the air. Lauren and Elliot took their drinks to go and returned the way they came, the sun inching higher in the pale blue sky. By the time they parted ways, Lauren's cheeks were pink with cold and laughter. Boone lumbered up the stairs behind Elliot, and Ranger paused at the foot of them as if reluctant to head back inside. That night, Lauren sat on the couch with her laptop. Ranger sprawled beside her, his head on her thigh. She wasn't working, just scrolling aimlessly, reading articles she wouldn't remember. Occasionally, she'd look down and scratch behind his ears, and he'd sigh in response. She hadn't realized how much of her time used to be filled with someone else's routines, David's video games in the background, his weekend golf trips, their weekly dinners with his parents. Now the evenings were quieter, and while the silence had once felt like a void, now it felt more like a pause, a breath. And Ranger was the anchor in that stillness. She tried once to put him back in his dog bed after he jumped onto the mattress that night. He obeyed, walking slowly back to the padded corner, curling up without complaint. But an hour later, she woke up to that same steady pressure by her calves. She didn't say anything, just reached back and rested her hand on his shoulder, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. The rain returned to Portland with a quiet vengeance, threading through gutters, dripping from balcony edges, seeping into the rhythm of daily life as if it had never left. Lauren Mitchell stood in her kitchen, cradling a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Outside, the clouds hung low over the Willoughby neighborhood, casting a silvery gloom through the window panes. It had been 3 weeks since she brought Ranger home. The habit of him sleeping at her feet had become a given, the weight of him a quiet reassurance in the dead of night. But lately, things were shifting. It had started with a simple headache, dull and harmless, just behind her eyes. She'd chalked it up to screen fatigue, the result of too many spreadsheets and late nights catching up on overdue reports. As a corporate accountant for a mid-sized tech firm headquartered downtown, Lauren was no stranger to numbers or the pressure they carried. But now the headaches came more frequently. They stayed longer. And the fog that settled in her brain didn't lift with coffee anymore. She leaned against the counter and pressed a hand to her forehead, eyes fluttering shut. Behind her, Ranger lay stretched on the rug in the living room, paws twitching in a light sleep. He'd been slower these past few mornings, less eager to rise, more reluctant on walks. His breath at night had taken on a subtle rasp, almost like a sigh stretched too far. She'd asked Elliot about it in passing during one of their casual stairwell chats. Maybe he's just adjusting, Elliot had said with a small shrug. Older dogs sleep more. If he's still eating and drinking, I wouldn't worry too much. Lauren wanted to believe him. But this morning, even Ranger had refused his usual breakfast, nosing the bowl gently before lying back down with a faint whimper. The buzzer rang just as she opened the fridge. She blinked, confused, and padded barefoot to the intercom. "Hello. It's me, dummy. Buzz me up." That voice, sharp, confident, unmistakably familiar, belonged to Jasmine Holt, Lauren's oldest friend since middle school in Spokane. She was everything Lauren wasn't: tall, sharply dressed, and a walking embodiment of momentum. Jasmine worked in brand management for an organic skincare startup and made it her mission to visit Lauren at least once every season. She hadn't mentioned this trip. Moments later, Lauren opened the door, and Jasmine swept in like a gust of spring air in boots. She wore a caramel trench coat, heels that made an unapologetic click on the wooden floor, and a high ponytail that swayed with every motion. Her makeup was minimal but precise, and her eyes immediately scanned the apartment like a designer stepping into a fixer-upper. "God, it smells like rain and old carpet in here," Jasmine declared, dropping her toad on the couch. "You look like a haunted librarian." Lauren laughed weakly. "Nice to see you too." But Jasmine didn't return the smile. Her expression shifted, brows pulling together as she took in her friend. "Lo, are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," Lauren replied, waving it off. "Just tired." "Work's been." "No," Jasmine said, stepping closer. "It's not just tired. You've lost weight. And your eyes? You look like you haven't slept in weeks." She reached out and touched Lauren's cheek with the back of her hand. "You're cold. Have you been eating?" Lauren hesitated. "Mostly. I just haven't had much of an appetite." "Have you seen a doctor?" "It's nothing. Probably just stress." Jasmine sighed and looked around. "And how's the mutt?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes remained sharp. "His name's Ranger," Lauren replied, instinctively defensive. "He's been off too. Sleeping more. Not eating well." Jasmine turned her head toward the living room, where Ranger lay curled tightly against the floor. His ears flicked at the sound of his name, but he didn't move. "He doesn't look great." "I know," Lauren admitted. "But the vet checked him when I adopted him. He was fine." "That was 3 weeks ago." Jasmine's voice softened. "Lo, what if something's wrong in here?" Lauren looked around. The apartment was tidy, lived in, and cozy in that second-hand, book-lined kind of way. Nothing screamed danger, but the words lodged somewhere in her mind, nagging like a splinter under skin. Jasmine stayed for tea, which Lauren barely sipped. They talked about old classmates, about Jasmine's disastrous new intern, about nothing and everything. But the concern never left Jasmine's face. She didn't bring it up again until she was putting on her coat. "Promise me you'll at least call a doctor. If not for you, then for Ranger." Lauren smiled faintly. "I will. I promise." When the door closed behind Jasmine, silence returned like a wave, folding over Lauren's shoulders. She walked into the living room, knelt beside Ranger, and ran her fingers through his fur. He lifted his head slowly, pressing it into her hand. "You're not yourself either, huh?" she whispered. "What's going on with us?" That night, the fatigue settled deeper. Lauren crawled into bed early, her limbs aching in a way that didn't make sense. Ranger followed, slower than usual, and curled beside her. The room was still. The hum of the heater, the faint tap of rain on the window, the rhythm of breathing, hers and his. But something wasn't right. And though neither of them could name it yet, their bodies had already started to speak. The night settled over Portland like a damp wool blanket, muffling even the late buses and usual city hum. Lauren lay curled beneath her duvet, her skin cold despite the warmth of the blankets. Her apartment, while modest and homey, carried an unusual chill that didn't match the thermostat reading. The radiator had clicked on hours earlier, its usual dry puff of warmth spreading throughout the apartment. But tonight, something about the air felt heavier. Not cold, exactly, but thick, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Ranger had climbed into bed just after she turned off the lights, curling against her legs as usual. His breath, usually steady and comforting, now had a different rhythm, a slight rasp beneath the exhale, like a door that didn't quite shut all the way. Lauren stirred, her hand instinctively reaching down to rest on his back. He shifted but didn't lift his head. Then it came again, a high-pitched hissing sound. It was faint, but unmistakable, seeping in from the corner vent by the floor. Lauren blinked through the dim room, unsure whether the sound had been real or conjured by a dream state. Her temples throbbed, and her chest felt as though it had forgotten how to rise without effort. She turned slightly, wincing at the weight in her limbs, and then felt Ranger move, not sluggishly this time, but with purpose. He stood, shaky but alert, and approached her side of the bed. Then he did something he'd never done before. He tugged at the blanket. At first, it was a soft nudge, his teeth gently pulling at the edge. Then a firmer tug. Then a low, desperate whimper. "Ranger," she croaked, her throat dry. She tried to sit up, but her body didn't respond the way it should have. Her arms moved like they were underwater. Ranger tugged again, eyes wide in the faint moonlight that crept between the blinds, his posture tense and urgent. Lauren forced herself to sit up, breathing heavy, heart knocking in her chest. She swung her legs over the side of the bed just as Ranger staggered backward, clearly exhausted by the effort. He let out a cough, short but jarring, and lay down again, chest rising in uneven waves. Then she heard it again. That hissing, not like a burst of steam, but a persistent, whisper-thin thread of sound coming from the heater vent. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone on the nightstand, but she didn't call anyone, not yet. Instead, she stared at the vent, unsure of what she was listening for, but deeply aware that something wasn't right. Downstairs, in the apartment below, Elliot Thomas had just finished rinsing out a paint tray when he heard it. The muffled bark of a dog, sharp and deliberate. He paused mid-motion, water splashing against the deep ceramic sink. Boone, his old Labrador, snored unbothered in the corner, curled beneath a blanket like a stubborn retiree. Elliot dried his hands, walked to the stairwell, and tilted his head toward the ceiling. There it was again, Ranger, barking once, then a low growl, then silence. He frowned. In the weeks since Lauren moved in, he'd come to recognize Ranger's temperament. Calm, observant, not the kind of dog to make noise without cause. He considered texting, then remembered the late hour and opted for caution. He grabbed a hoodie, pulled it over his paint-streaked t-shirt, and jogged up the flight of stairs in thick socks. Lauren opened the door before he knocked. She looked off, not just tired, but drained, as if someone had pressed the life out of her like water from a sponge. Her eyes were glassy, cheeks pale. She leaned against the frame for support. "Lauren." Elliot stepped closer. "Hey, you okay?" "I heard Ranger." Her voice was a whisper. "He woke me up. I think something's wrong with the heat." Elliot's eyes flicked past her into the apartment. It looked normal, lamps on, everything in its place. But there was a smell. Faint, metallic, almost sweet. Not strong, but noticeable now that he'd stepped inside. Ranger lay by the bed, his chest moving unevenly, eyes half-lidded but watching. Elliot moved to the corner of the room where the vent hissed. He crouched down and pressed his hand near the grate. "Do you smell that?" he asked. Lauren nodded slowly. "It's been happening the last few nights. I thought I was just tired. But She gestured to Ranger. "He woke me." Elliot stood, his brow furrowed. "You need to call your landlord. This isn't just a weird smell. That heater could be leaking something. Gas, maybe carbon monoxide. You have a detector?" Lauren blinked. "No. I meant to buy one." "But," he nodded, already pulling out his phone. "You need to sleep somewhere else tonight. I'll help you grab a few things. You can crash on my couch. Boone'll share." Lauren opened her mouth to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. Elliot's calm was different tonight. Measured, serious, and full of something that resembled quiet fear. 15 minutes later, she was seated on Elliot's couch downstairs, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, a mug of tea trembling in her hands. Boone snored on a nearby rug. Ranger lay beside her, head on her foot, finally sleeping in peace. Elliot stood by the kitchen counter, already Googling local inspection services. "We'll figure this out," he said, not looking up. "But I'm not letting you go back up there until someone checks that system." Lauren nodded, finally allowing the fear to rise now that she was somewhere safe. She reached down and stroked Ranger's head. "He knew something was wrong," she whispered. Elliot looked at her for a long moment, then gave a quiet nod. "Sometimes animals know before we do." Morning came reluctantly, the Portland sky a dull pewter dome over the city. Fog clung to the treetops and telephone wires, blurring the edges of houses, and turning even the shortest walk into a scene from an old film. Lauren sat in the passenger seat of Elliot's pickup, her knees drawn up slightly, fingers curled around the handle of the dog crate beside her. Ranger sat inside, eyes half-lidded but alert, his tail tapping lightly against the plastic wall every time Lauren spoke his name. Elliot drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gearshift. He was dressed in a dark flannel jacket and gray jeans, his hair still damp from a rushed shower, and his expression focused. They had called the vet as soon as the clinic opened, and Dr. Hale had squeezed them in for an emergency checkup. "Don't worry," Elliot said quietly. "It's probably nothing. Might just be a respiratory bug." Lauren nodded but didn't answer. Something about the way Ranger had coughed, wet and low, like gravel rolling underwater, made her stomach twist. And the dizziness she'd felt the night before hadn't quite left her, despite the fresh air and strong coffee Elliot had pressed into her hands just hours earlier. The veterinary clinic was tucked into a row of maple trees on the edge of Lentz, Portland's quieter southeast neighborhood. The building was low and wood-paneled, with ivy climbing up its sides and a small fenced-in play yard for recovering animals near the back. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and peanut butter treats. The front desk was manned by Shelley, a petite woman in her 50s with cropped salt and pepper hair, thick-rimmed glasses, and a cardigan covered in embroidered cats. She greeted them warmly and waved them through to exam room 2. Dr. Hale entered 5 minutes later. Tall, lean, and in his late 40s, he moved with the kind of quiet authority reserved for people who had seen hundreds of emergencies but still knew each one was personal. His hair was closely cropped and silver at the temples. His voice had a soft, direct cadence, like someone who chose every word with care. "Lauren, good to see you again," he said, giving a quick nod to Elliot. "You must be Ranger." Ranger offered a weak wag of the tail and rested his head on the exam table without resistance. Lauren explained everything, his sudden fatigue, the coughs, the change in appetite. Hale listened without interruption, gently running his hands along Ranger's ribs and spine, pressing near his lungs, checking his gums and heart rate. When he lifted Ranger's paw to check the pads, his brow furrowed. "Has he been lethargic for more than a couple of days?" "Yes," Lauren said, voice tight. "It started gradually, but now, it feels like he's just tired all the time." "Any vomiting? Diarrhea?" "No, just weakness. And a wheeze when he breathes sometimes. Last night, he tried to wake me up. He seemed scared." Dr. Hale stood up, removed his gloves, and crossed his arms. "His lungs sound slightly restricted, and there's mild discoloration in the gums, less oxygen than normal. No fever, no infection markers. I'd like to run a tox panel to check for low-level poisoning." Lauren blinked. "Poisoning? Could be environmental. Maybe something in the air or a substance he's been exposed to. It's not acute, otherwise he'd be much worse. But it's worth ruling out." A long silence followed. Elliot shifted his weight, arms crossed. "What kind of toxins?" "Carbon monoxide, antifreeze residue, mold spores, things you can't always smell. Most commonly in older homes with bad venting or heaters that haven't been serviced." "Does your apartment have gas heat?" Lauren hesitated. "Yes." "And do you have a CO detector?" She shook her head. Dr. Hale gave her a measured look. "Then I suggest getting one. Today." He carried Ranger into the back for the blood draw. Lauren sat frozen in the corner chair, hands clasped, gaze distant. The word poisoning buzzed in her head like a wasp. Elliot cleared his throat. "You know, I worked for a heating company for 3 years after high school. Helped install and service HVAC systems before I moved into plumbing." She turned to him, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah. Still remember most of it. I can take a look at your system if you want. See if there's anything obvious." Lauren shook her head quickly. "You've already done too much. I don't want to drag you into this." "It's not a drag if it might keep you safe," he said simply. "Or Ranger. I don't want to be a burden." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Lauren, you're not a burden. You're someone I care about. Let me help." She opened her mouth to respond, but Dr. Hale returned before she could speak. "I've taken the samples. We'll have results by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, make sure he stays hydrated, keep him somewhere well-ventilated, and seriously, get that CO detector." They thanked him, collected Ranger, and drove home in silence. The dog rested his head on Lauren's lap the entire way, his eyes never closing but never fully alert either. Back in the apartment, Lauren moved slowly, gathering a few essentials, feeling like a stranger in her own space. Ranger collapsed onto his bed with a soft grunt. Lauren walked to the heater vent and crouched, placing her palm near the opening. The air was warm, but something about it still felt wrong. Downstairs, Elliot filled a thermos with tea and stared up at the ceiling. Something gnawed at him. That look on Ranger's face, Lauren's weakened state. He couldn't prove it, not yet. But his instincts screamed, this wasn't over. The morning arrived slowly, sluggishly, like molasses sliding down glass. Outside, the Portland sky was overcast again, clouds hanging like thick cotton, muting the city's already quiet hum. Inside her apartment, Lauren felt as though the walls themselves had begun to lean inward. The air felt heavier. Each breath took more effort than the last. She sat at her kitchen table, hunched over a bowl of oatmeal that had gone cold. Her spoon remained still in her hand. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. Dark crescents hung under her eyes, and her lips had lost their usual rose tint. She hadn't showered in 2 days. She barely remembered the last proper meal. The email notifications from work had piled up, and this morning, she didn't even open her laptop. The idea of numbers, spreadsheets, or even typing a response made her chest tighten. She was slipping, quietly, but unmistakably. Ranger lay curled up by the sliding glass door, where the pale light spilled across the floor. He didn't rise when she moved, didn't look up when she called his name softly. His chest rose and fell in shallow waves. It had been hours since he'd eaten. Even his tail, once so eager, now remained limp. Lauren stood, or tried to. The second she lifted herself from the chair, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room blurred at the edges, the floor tilting ever so slightly beneath her feet. She grasped the table for support, knuckles white. A cold sweat broke across her neck. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with panic, but with a dull, mechanical persistence, like an engine straining uphill. She didn't hear the knock at first. It came again, firm, then a pause, then again, insistent. She shuffled toward the door, dragging a blanket around her shoulders like armor. When she opened it, the person on the other side gasped. Jesus, Lauren. Jasmine stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes darted across Lauren's face, scanning her like a battlefield medic. You look like you've been locked in a freezer. Jasmine Holt, always the storm in every quiet room, wore a knee-length tan coat over black leggings and boots polished to perfection. Her lipstick was deep red, her long hair pulled into a high braid. Her energy, as always, was sharp and immediate. But today, behind her confidence was genuine fear. Lauren tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. I was going to call you. Jasmine dropped her purse to the floor and reached out, gripping her friend's arms. No, you were going to pass out. Then maybe call me if you woke up again. Her eyes flicked toward the living room. Where's Ranger? Lauren gestured weakly. He's there, he's just tired. Jasmine crossed the room quickly, kneeling beside the dog. Ranger opened his eyes, gave a low groan, but didn't lift his head. Jasmine frowned, then sniffed the air. She turned toward the heater vent and walked toward it slowly. She crouched down, hand hovering near the metal. There's something wrong, she said quietly. It smells metallic, like burned wires and something sweet. You don't smell that. Lauren leaned against the wall, her breath shallow. It's been like that for a while, I think. I didn't. I thought I was just sick. But Ranger's been worse. Jasmine stood up sharply. Get your coat. We're leaving. Now. What? I'm not arguing, Lauren. I'm getting you and the dog out of here. Too weak to protest, Lauren simply nodded. 10 minutes later, Jasmine had helped her gather a few essentials. Wallet, phone, keys, a sweater that no longer fit quite right over her shoulders. She threw a leash on Ranger, who followed only because Jasmine coaxed him, step by step, out the door. Lauren leaned heavily on Jasmine as they descended the stairs, her vision tunneling briefly until the cold outside slapped color into her cheeks. They climbed into Jasmine's car, a hybrid with leather seats and the faint scent of lavender, and pulled away from the curb. Lauren stared blankly through the window, her head resting against the glass. I don't know what's happening, she whispered. Jasmine kept her eyes on the road. We're going to figure it out. But something in that place is messing with you. You've never looked like this, Lo. Not even when you got pneumonia in college. Lauren gave a dry, humorless laugh. At least I had the energy to watch movies back then. Jasmine glanced at her. You're lucky Ranger was with you. Honestly, if he hadn't looked as bad as you did, I might have believed it was stress. But both of you, at the same time? That's not a coincidence. Lauren's hand reached down to rest on Ranger's back in the back seat. He was quiet, his eyes half shut, his body curled against the door. The city passed by in muted tones, gray sky, silver streets, pedestrians wrapped in thick coats and scarves. Where are we going? Lauren asked. My place, Jasmine said. You're not stepping foot in that apartment until someone with credentials checks it. And I mean professionals, not Elliot with a wrench and a good heart. Lauren's lips curved slightly. He offered. I'm sure he did. And I like him. But no, this needs real eyes. As the car pulled into Jasmine's gated condo complex on the east side, Lauren felt the weight in her chest ease just slightly. The building was warm, with high ceilings and plenty of natural light. Jasmine helped her onto the couch, tossed a blanket over her, and then turned on the air purifier she kept near the living room window. Ranger lay on the rug nearby, breathing already steadier. Let's just get you through tonight, Jasmine said, standing above her. Then tomorrow, we make calls. The sterile white walls of St. Helens Medical Center smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Lauren sat hunched in the examination room, her hoodie draped over her shoulders like a shield. The chair beneath her felt too firm, the room too bright, every sensation dialed up just enough to make her skin itch. She blinked slowly, her eyes struggling to focus on the blood pressure monitor across from her. Her breath came easier now, but there was still a weight pressing into her chest, a reminder of the past week's invisible battle. Dr. Meera Patel entered the room quietly, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. Meera was a woman in her early 50s, medium height, with a graceful composure and ironed gray scrubs. Her black hair was pulled into a low bun, and wire-rimmed glasses rested near the tip of her nose. She was calm in the way people are when they've seen far worse and have learned never to alarm unnecessarily. Lauren, she said gently, I've looked at your blood work. There are several things we need to talk about. Lauren straightened slightly, fingers tightening on the edges of the blanket Jasmine had wrapped around her. Is it serious? Meera sat across from her. You're experiencing mild hypoxia, low oxygen levels in your blood, and signs of carbon monoxide exposure. It's not acute, which is why you didn't pass out or show sudden symptoms, but the exposure's been chronic. It's been building for weeks. Lauren's lips parted, the words caught behind her teeth. She finally whispered, That's why I felt drained. Why Ranger got sick. Meera nodded. Carbon monoxide is odorless, colorless, and very dangerous, especially in enclosed spaces without proper ventilation. It bonds with hemoglobin in your blood, reducing your body's ability to carry oxygen. It also explains the fatigue, headaches, dizziness, even the digestive issues you've likely brushed off. Lauren's thoughts spun, landing on one clear image. Ranger tugging at her blanket in the middle of the night, eyes wide with silent desperation. Meera continued, You're stable now, and the oxygen we've given you has helped, but I strongly recommend you don't return to that apartment until it's professionally assessed. Lauren nodded slowly, still pale. My friend Jasmine, she already pulled me out of there. She said it smelled wrong. She's reaching out to someone to help check the place. Outside, in the hospital waiting room, Jasmine paced in front of a row of gray plastic chairs, phone pressed to her ear. She wore yesterday's clothes, creased and slightly wrinkled, but her movements were sharp and purposeful. On the other end of the call, Elliot's voice came through, steady and low. CO exposure? Yes, Jasmine snapped. The hospital confirmed it. She's stable, but they said it could have gotten worse if she stayed longer. Elliot, she was sleeping in that room every night. There was silence for a moment. Let me grab my tools, Elliot said finally. I'm on my way. He arrived at the apartment an hour later, dressed in a dark denim jacket over a gray flannel shirt, a heavy canvas bag slung over one shoulder. He carried himself with practiced precision, moving quickly but without panic. In his hands was a portable carbon monoxide detector, small, square, with a digital screen that blinked silently in standby mode. The apartment felt colder than usual when he stepped inside, though the thermostat read a steady 70. The air was stagnant, as if it had been holding its breath along with its inhabitant. He crouched beside the wall heater in Lauren's bedroom, placed the sensor close to the base, and turned it on. The screen flickered, numbers jumping for a few seconds before settling. Elliot watched as the level began to rise. 17 ppm, then 22, then 36. His jaw clenched. Not immediately lethal, but far above the recommended safe level for continuous exposure, especially in a bedroom, especially overnight. He ran the detector over other parts of the apartment, the kitchen, the hallway, the vent beside the bathroom. Minor traces. But the heater was the epicenter. By the time he returned to the bedroom, the detector blinked 42. He pulled out his phone, snapping a photo of the readout, then called Jasmine. "Tell Lauren not to come back here," he said. "I found the source." "What is it?" she asked, already bracing herself. "The heater's leaking carbon monoxide into the bedroom. Low but steady. No detector means she's been breathing it every night." Jasmine swore under her breath. "I knew something was wrong. I could smell it, even if I didn't know what it was. She's lucky you pulled her out." A few more nights, and this story might have ended differently. Elliot hung up and stood in the middle of the room, the weight of everything finally settling in his chest. He looked toward the spot where Ranger had been lying, near the vent, night after night. The dog had known. Somehow he'd known. Back at Jasmine's condo, Lauren sat curled under a throw blanket, sipping water slowly. Ranger lay at her feet, his breathing more even, his ears flicking occasionally at the muffled sounds from outside. Jasmine returned, her voice quieter now. "Elliot found it. The heater's the problem. Carbon monoxide levels are above safe. He's turning it off and calling your building manager." Lauren nodded, tears stinging her eyes. Not from fear anymore, but from relief. The worst was real, and it had a name. And now, finally, they could act. 3 days after the diagnosis, Portland finally broke into sunlight. The gray veil that had hung over the city since October lifted, revealing blue skies sponged with soft, white clouds. Through the tall windows of Jasmine's apartment, the morning light spilled across the hardwood floor like a quiet benediction. Lauren sat on the edge of the guest bed with a cup of tea cradled in her hands, her hair tucked into a messy bun and a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. She looked better, still pale, but the hollowness in her cheeks had begun to fade. Her eyes no longer struggled to stay open. Her breathing, though measured, came easier now. At her feet, Ranger lay stretched out on a small fleece blanket Jasmine had designated as his recovery zone. The dog's eyes followed Lauren slowly as she moved, but no longer held that glassy sheen of fatigue. His tail thumped gently once, then again. It was the first real wag in days. Jasmine, dressed in a green hoodie and black yoga pants, leaned in from the hallway. "You hungry?" Lauren looked down at her cup. "I think I could manage toast." Jasmine grinned. "Then that's what you'll get. Artisan toast with the most overpriced jam in the city." As Jasmine moved into the kitchen, Lauren turned her gaze out the window. Life outside seemed so normal. A jogger passing with a golden retriever, a couple laughing as they balanced coffee cups and grocery bags. It struck her just how close she'd come to missing all of it. By noon, Elliot arrived. He stood in the entryway wearing his usual dark flannel and jeans, but this time, he carried a cardboard box marked Hardware Plus Safety. His eyes lit up when he saw Lauren standing without assistance. "You look human again," he said with a warm smile. "I'm evolving," Lauren replied. "Soon I'll rejoin civilization." He set the box down and pulled out a small digital carbon monoxide detector. "Ready to make your apartment a little less deadly?" Jasmine crossed her arms from the kitchen. "Please tell me you're not letting her move back in without a full safety plan." "I'm not suicidal," Lauren said. "We're doing this by the book." The three of them returned to the apartment later that afternoon. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something sterile, like it had been scrubbed, aired, and wiped down a dozen times. The heating system had been shut off since Elliot's inspection, and a professional technician, Tom Reddick, a short, stocky man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and hands stained from decades of mechanical work, had come and replaced the corroded heat exchanger just that morning. Tom was a no-nonsense type, efficient and matter-of-fact. "That crack's been leaking for months," he had told them. "You're lucky your dog noticed something was wrong. Most people don't get that warning." Now, with Tom's work complete, Elliot moved through the apartment with a practiced grace, installing detectors in strategic spots, one near the heater, another in the hallway outside Lauren's bedroom, and a third by the kitchen. As he worked, he spoke in that calm, grounding tone Lauren had come to recognize. CO detectors aren't just about warning you when something's already bad. They measure gradual buildup, help you catch a leak before it gets dangerous. Lauren watched him, arms crossed, absorbing each detail. You can also check for subtle signs, he added, like moisture on windows near heat vents, soot marks, or pilot lights that go out for no reason. And always, always, trust your dog. She smiled at that. Ranger saved my life. Elliot paused, glanced at her. He really did. As he finished mounting the final detector, Lauren stepped into the room, Ranger close behind. The dog sniffed the new device curiously, then turned his head toward Elliot, ears perked in familiar approval. Once the detectors were installed, the group gathered in the living room, now aired out and brighter with sunlight. Jasmine had brought over a few groceries, fruits, tea, fresh bread, and insisted they stock the place with real food and real nutrients. Over the next few days, Lauren stayed cautious. She didn't rush back into her job, choosing instead to take a week of medical leave. Her boss had been understanding, especially after she shared the hospital report. Ranger improved steadily, his appetite returning first, then his energy. Within 4 days, he was back to bringing her socks from the laundry hamper, tail wagging like a proud toddler with finger paint. One afternoon, Lauren and Elliot sat on the back porch, sharing lukewarm coffee from mismatched mugs. Ranger snoozed at their feet, his head on Lauren's bare ankle. The sun cut across the wooden railing, making dust motes shimmer. I keep thinking about how easily this could have gone the other way, she said quietly. If Ranger hadn't tried to wake me. I've seen it happen, Elliot replied. We used to get called to houses where the only thing alerting the family was a pet, or sometimes no one got out at all. Lauren turned to him, the words slow and measured. You saved me too. You showed up when I didn't even realize I needed help. He shrugged, his mouth curving slightly. You'd have done the same. She didn't answer, but she reached out and squeezed his hand. For a long moment, they just sat there, hands tangled in silence, while Ranger stretched beside them, safe, whole, and home. The morning was clear, the sky over Portland washed with crisp late autumn light. Lauren sat by the small kitchen table in her freshly aired apartment, laptop open, fingers poised above the keyboard. Ranger, now fully recovered, lay sprawled beneath the table, his paws twitching lightly as he dreamed. The sunlight caught on the tips of his golden black fur, giving him a bronze halo. For a long time, Lauren just watched him. Even when he was still, she could feel the life in him, alert, loyal, ever present. She had wrestled with what to say all night. How much to share, how to frame it. But now, with the room filled with clean air and quiet calm, the words finally came. She typed slowly at first, then with growing resolve. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was just tired, overworked, stressed. But what I didn't know was that my home was quietly poisoning me. I was being exposed to carbon monoxide every night through a faulty heater. I might never have realized, if not for this dog. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't panic. He just kept nudging me awake, pulling at the blanket, trying to get me to move. He saved me. Because of him, I left that apartment in time. And because of my friends, Jasmine, who trusted her instincts, and Elliot, who knew how to look deeper, I got answers. Please, if you're reading this, check your detectors. Install one if you don't have it. Listen to your pets. Sometimes, they know something's wrong before we do. This dog saved my life. She attached a photo she had taken the day before. Ranger curled up at her feet on the back porch, his eyes alert, his ears slightly perked as if listening to a sound only he could hear. The caption read, "This dog saved my life. Pay attention to the quiet signs." She hit post. Within minutes, the notifications began trickling in, comments, messages, reactions. People shared their own stories of close calls, of pets warning them in subtle ways. Some admitted they'd never even thought about carbon monoxide, never owned a detector. Friends she hadn't heard from in years texted her. Strangers sent messages thanking her for speaking out. By mid-afternoon, the post had gone viral. That same day, she called Heartline Animal Shelter. The voice on the other end was a familiar one. Marcia, the shelter manager, a tall woman in her 60s with a firm, motherly tone, and silver-streaked braids pinned tightly at the back of her head. She had been the one who handed Ranger to her that first day, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning with experience. Marcia, it's Lauren Mitchell. I adopted Ranger about a month ago. Oh yes, Marcia said warmly. How's our quiet boy doing? Lauren smiled. He's well. Better than me, honestly. He saved me. Literally. After a pause, Lauren told her everything. The sickness, the gas leak, the hospital visit, how Ranger had tried to wake her before it was too late. Marcia was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had softened. That dog, he always had that look. Like he'd seen something we never would. I knew he had a reason for waiting. Maybe that reason was you. I want to give something back, Lauren said. I bought 10 carbon monoxide detectors. I want to donate them to the shelter. If you could give one to every new adopter, we'd be honored, Marcia replied. Come by tomorrow. We'll have coffee, and I want to see Ranger again. The next morning, Lauren and Ranger made their way to the shelter. The crisp air bit gently at her cheeks as they approached the familiar red building. Ranger pulled gently at the leash, tail high and swaying. He remembered. Inside, the scent of pine cleaner and dog shampoo hadn't changed. Marcia greeted them near the lobby with a broad smile and an outstretched hand. My hero, she said, kneeling to scratch behind Ranger's ears. He leaned into her touch with familiar ease. Lauren handed over the box of detectors. It's not much, but it's everything, Marcia said. These things cost money, and people don't always think about them until it's too late. If this can help even one person, it's worth it. They shared coffee in the staff lounge, Lauren chatting briefly with a few volunteers. One of them, Devin, a soft-spoken college student with unruly red curls and a nervous energy, asked if he could share her story on the shelter's newsletter. Please do, Lauren said. The more people know, the better. As they left, Marcia handed Lauren a small envelope. Just a thank you note. And a picture of Ranger from his first day here. I thought you'd like to see where your miracle began. That night, Lauren placed the old shelter photo beside her desk. In it, Ranger sat quietly in the corner of his kennel, ears forward, eyes calm. Waiting, not lost, not afraid. Just waiting. Lauren ran her hand through his fur as he lay curled beside her on the couch. Thank you, she whispered. Ranger responded with a gentle huff and shifted closer. It was the first truly warm morning of December. One of those rare Portland days when the cold lifted and the air carried a promise of something more forgiving. Lauren stepped out onto her porch, wrapped in a faded gray cardigan, a mug of tea warming her hands. The sun filtered through the bare branches above, painting pale gold lines across the wooden railing. Ranger sat beside her, ears forward, eyes closed, his body pressed lightly against her shin. They had settled into a rhythm, no longer simply recovering, but thriving. The apartment felt different now. Not just cleaner or safer, but awake. Each room had taken on new meaning. This was where she had nearly faded, and this was where she had come back. The carbon monoxide detectors blinked softly in each corner like silent guardians, but what truly made her feel safe wasn't their green lights. It was the steady presence of the German shepherd at her side. Ranger, once quiet and cautious, had softened around her. He still carried that weathered dignity, his back straight, movements deliberate, but when he looked at Lauren, his gaze had a gentleness born from something deeper than instinct. At night, he still slept beside her, not for protection, but because he belonged there. Lauren set her tea down and knelt beside him, pressing her forehead lightly against his. You didn't just save me, she murmured. You stayed even when I didn't know I needed saving. Ranger responded with a low, contented hum of breath, then gently licked the side of her jaw before resting his head on her knee. Later that afternoon, Elliot arrived, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the porch as he stepped through the front gate. He wore a dark blue hoodie over jeans and carried a leash in one hand. At the end of it was Duke, his Labrador mix with broad shoulders and the kind of clumsy charm that turned heads at every park. Duke was 10, older, a bit slower, with a white patch on his muzzle and a fondness for sleeping under sunny windows. Hope you don't mind some company, Elliot said, smiling as Duke immediately trotted over to sniff Ranger's ear with the enthusiasm of a dog half his age. They've got a weird understanding, Lauren said, watching Ranger tolerate Duke's inspection with quiet grace. Elliot stepped closer and kissed her cheek. Light, familiar. What had started as friendship had slowly, unassumingly become something more. There were no declarations, no rushed emotions. Just a shared quiet, a steady loyalty that mirrored the very animals they loved. They spent the afternoon walking along the Springwater Corridor Trail, a stretch of urban green that wound through trees and creeks, and sometimes made the city feel like a distant rumor. Ranger walked at Lauren's side, while Duke zigzagged ahead, chasing invisible squirrels and doubling back whenever he realized no one was laughing at his antics. As they walked, Lauren told Elliot about a comment someone had left on her viral post. A woman from Colorado who had also been saved by her dog from a silent gas leak. Another had ordered 3 detectors for her parents after reading the story. Another had written simply, "Thank you. You changed my perspective." "You didn't just survive," Elliot said, glancing sideways at her. "You made it mean something." Lauren nodded slowly. "I think I was supposed to. I think Ranger was too." By early evening, they returned to the apartment. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the space. Lauren had bought a small tabletop tree, undecorated except for a single red ornament that had belonged to her mother. A little light, a little warmth. Just enough. Duke plopped onto the living room rug with an exaggerated sigh, paws splayed, while Ranger positioned himself in his usual spot by the arm of the couch. Elliot made tea in the kitchen while Lauren lit a candle and turned on the record player, letting a soft jazz tune hum through the walls. When they sat down, she rested her legs over Elliot's lap and leaned back, the cup warming her palms. Ranger's head nudged against her thigh, and Duke stretched until his paw landed on Elliot's boot. "This feels right," Lauren said, almost surprised by her own voice. Not flashy, not loud, just safe. Elliot didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down and scratched behind Ranger's ears. "Funny thing about dogs," he said finally. "They don't need grand gestures. Just trust. Just presence." Lauren looked at him, her eyes soft. "That's what this is, isn't it? What we're building." He smiled. "A slow, steady kind of love. Like Ranger's." They fell into silence, not the kind that fills space awkwardly, but the kind that holds you gently. Ranger exhaled and rested his chin on her knee once again. That night, as Lauren lay in bed, her hand resting on the soft fur at Ranger's side, she thought about all the things she had once believed were essential: her job title, her perfectly curated apartment, the relationship that had left her feeling more alone than she'd ever admit. None of those had saved her. What had saved her was quieter, unassuming, for legs, steady eyes, and a heart that never stopped listening. She whispered into the dark, not for the first time, "Thank you." And as Ranger's tail thumped once in response, she knew she'd never take another moment for granted. Not the breath in her chest, not the love that watched in silence, not the second chance she'd been given. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or flashes of light. Sometimes, they come quietly, in the form of a dog with knowing eyes, a nudge in the middle of the night, a breath beside you when you're too weak to even call for help. Ranger wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian, a messenger sent when Lauren needed saving the most. Through him, we are reminded that God's love often speaks in silence, acts in whispers, and protects us through the loyalty of the smallest of creatures. In the rush of everyday life, we often ignore the soft signs: fatigue, a strange sound, a persistent instinct. But this story shows that God is always near. Sometimes, he speaks through a faithful dog. Sometimes, through a concerned friend. Sometimes, through a second chance. Real love doesn't need grand gestures. It watches. It waits. And when the time is right, it saves. If you believe God still performs miracles, even through the quiet loyalty of a dog, type Amen in the comments. Let the world know you still believe in love, hope, and divine protection.